I decided to surprise my wife at her office that afternoon. It wasn't anything dramatic, just lunch from her favorite Italian place, something small after another long week of late nights and missed dinners. After 28 years of marriage, she has stopped chasing big moments and start holding on to the quiet ones. I thought she'd smile when she saw me, maybe take a break, maybe remember that there was still a life outside those glass walls she spent most of her time in. Meridian Technologies stood tall and polished, just like her reputation. She had built everything in that building from nothing, turned a struggling company into something powerful, and I had been there for every step of it. I had always been proud of her. I still was when I walked through those doors. The lobby was calm, efficient, filled with people who looked like they knew exactly where they were going. I walked up to the security desk, holding the takeout bag, already picturing her reaction. I told the guard I was there to see Lauren Sterling. He didn't seem impressed. He simply said only authorized personnel could go up. I smiled and told him that was fine because I was her husband. That was when everything shifted. He laughed, not politely, not awkwardly, just casually, like I had said something completely ridiculous. He looked at me and said he saw her husband there every day. For a second, I thought I had heard him wrong. I asked him what he meant, but he didn't hesitate. He pointed toward the entrance behind me and said there he was, right on time. I turned, almost slowly, like some part of me already knew I wasn't going to like what I saw. A man walked through the doors with confidence, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, moving like he belonged there more than anyone else in the room. The guard greeted him like it was routine, told him his wife was still in a meeting. The man nodded, calm, familiar, expected. Then he headed toward the elevators without a second thought. My last name echoed in my head, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. Something inside me didn't break, not yet, but it shifted. Heavy, slow, like the ground beneath me had started to crack. Every instinct told me to walk over there, to stop him, to ask him who he thought he was. But I didn't move. The guard's tone hadn't carried doubt. There was no confusion, no hesitation. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was normal to him. Everyone here accepted it like it was just another part of the day. I forced a small laugh and stepped back, telling him I must have the wrong building. He looked confused, but I didn't give him time to question it. I placed the food on the desk and asked him to give it to her, told him to say it was from a family friend. Then I walked out before my legs could fail me. I sat in my car afterward, hands gripping the wheel, staring straight ahead as the same thought repeated in my mind over and over again. 28 years of marriage, and somehow my wife had another husband. And the worst part wasn't what I saw. It was the way everyone else already knew. I didn't go home immediately because I couldn't bring myself to step back into a life that suddenly felt uncertain. I drove around for a while before stopping at a quiet coffee shop, sitting there with a cup in front of me that I never touched. My mind kept replaying the same moment, the guard's voice, the confidence in it, the man who carried my last name like it belonged to him. Around early evening, my phone buzzed. It was Lauren. She said she was working late again and told me not to wait up, ending it the way she always did, saying she loved me. I stared at that message longer than I should have. The words didn't land the same anymore. I replied simply, telling her there was food in the fridge, and left it at that. She came home close to midnight. I was in the living room pretending to read, though I hadn't turned a page in hours. She greeted me like always, tired but warm, asking about my day. I asked about hers, keeping my voice steady, normal. She told me about meetings, pressure from the board, and then casually mentioned that she had spent time going over projections with Frank. Hearing his name out loud felt different now, heavier, like it carried a meaning I had only just begun to understand. She went to the kitchen, heated the food, came back and sat across from me like it was any other night. That was when I tested her. I told her I had stopped by her office earlier with lunch. She paused, just for a second, but I noticed. After 28 years, you notice everything. She said she hadn't received anything. I told her I had given it to Frank, assuming he would pass it along. There was another pause, slightly longer this time, but she recovered quickly, saying it must have been a busy day and things got lost. Her voice didn't crack, her expression didn't change. It was smooth, practiced, almost effortless. That was the moment something inside me turned colder. Not anger, not yet, just clarity beginning to form. We sat there quietly for a while, her eating, me pretending to read, both of us playing our parts perfectly. A normal couple on the surface, but underneath it, something was unraveling fast. Later that night, she fell asleep quickly as she always did, completely at ease. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, unable to shut my mind off. The image of that man kept coming back, along with the guard's words, repeating like a loop I couldn't escape. Eventually, I got up and walked to her study. The door was open, just like always. There had never been a reason to question anything before. Her laptop was on the desk, and this time I didn't hesitate as much when I opened it. Her email inbox looked normal at first glance, full of routine conversations and routine updates. Nothing obvious, nothing immediate, so I moved to her calendar. That was where things started to feel different. Meetings, calls, presentations, all the usual entries, but then I noticed small patterns, dinners marked with a single letter, trips that didn't quite match what she had told me, repeated entries connected to the same person. I didn't have proof yet, not something I could point to and say this is the truth, but I had enough to know one thing for certain. Something wasn't right, and for the first time in nearly 3 decades, I wasn't willing to ignore it anymore. The next morning, after Lauren left for work like nothing had changed, I didn't sit in denial anymore. I moved with purpose. Something inside me had shifted overnight, turning doubt into something sharper, something focused. I went straight back to her study, opened her laptop, and this time I wasn't just looking for answers, I was looking for proof. I went deeper into her files, her accounts, her records, following small inconsistencies until they started forming a pattern I couldn't ignore. That was when I found the key. It was hidden in the back of her jewelry drawer, tucked beneath pieces she never wore, almost like it wasn't meant to be found, but wasn't fully hidden either. Attached to it was a tag with an address, Harbor View Apartments, Unit 214. I stared at it for a long moment, already knowing that whatever was waiting behind that door would confirm everything I feared. The drive there felt unreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold from a distance. The building was exactly what I expected, expensive, quiet, designed for people who valued privacy. When I entered the parking garage, I saw the car immediately, a black Mercedes parked neatly in the spot labeled 214. I recognized it without hesitation. It belonged to Frank. My chest tightened, but I kept moving. The elevator ride was silent, too quiet, like the building itself was holding its breath. When I reached the second floor and stood in front of the door, my hand hesitated for just a second before I used the key. Inside wasn't just an apartment, it was a life, fully built, fully lived, carefully arranged. Everything was in place like it had been there for years. The air smelled like her perfume, the one she only wore on special occasions. There were fresh flowers on the table, 2 coffee mugs on the counter, his and hers. Photos lined the shelves, Lauren and Frank smiling together in places I had never been, living moments I had never shared. In every picture, she looked lighter, freer, and in none of them was she wearing her wedding ring. That was the moment the truth stopped being a possibility and became something absolute. I walked through the apartment slowly, taking in every detail. The bedroom was the hardest to process. Her clothes were in the closet, hanging beside his. Her shoes lined up next to his like they belonged there, like she belonged there. This wasn't an affair. This was a second life, carefully constructed piece by piece, while I continued living in the first one, completely unaware.
On the dresser, I found a folder labeled Future Plans. My hands weren't steady as I opened it. Inside were real estate listings, houses marked and circled with notes about schools, neighborhoods, and space. Travel plans followed, destinations for what could only be described as a honeymoon. Beneath that were legal documents, divorce consultations dating back over a year. She hadn't just thought about leaving me, she had planned it in detail. Timelines, strategies, notes about how to frame me as distant, unambitious, unsupportive. Moments from our life twisted into evidence against me. It was calculated, cold, precise. The final page outlined everything clearly. File for divorce, finalize quickly, marry Frank within the year. I sat there, holding those papers, and felt something inside me settle in a way that was almost unsettling. The confusion was gone. The denial was gone. All that remained was truth. Later, when I checked the financial records again, it all aligned. The rent for this apartment, the furniture, the trips, the dinners, all paid from accounts I trusted. Money I believed was building our future had been used to build hers with someone else. Over 3 years, it added up to a life I had unknowingly funded. Sitting there in that apartment, surrounded by proof, I finally understood something clearly. My marriage hadn't just been falling apart, it had already been replaced, and I had been the last one to realize it.
By the time I left that apartment, I wasn't the same person who had walked into it. The confusion had been replaced with clarity, and that clarity came with a decision. I wasn't going to confront her blindly or beg for explanations that had already been written in those documents. Instead, I did what I knew best. I gathered everything. Every photo, every record, every transaction, every piece of evidence that told the full story. If she had spent years building a hidden life, then I was going to make sure that life couldn't stay hidden anymore. That afternoon, I contacted the one person who could bring everything into the light, the chairman of her company. When he arrived, I showed him everything without hesitation. I watched his expression shift as the truth unfolded. Not just the affair, but the financial manipulation, the restructuring of the company to benefit Frank, the misuse of resources driven by a personal relationship. By the time I finished, the silence in the room said everything. This wasn't just personal betrayal, this was professional misconduct. When Lauren came home that evening, she already knew something was wrong. I could see it in her face before she even spoke. She confronted me immediately, her voice shaking with anger and fear, accusing me of interfering in her work, of crossing boundaries. I listened quietly, then showed her the evidence. The photos, the documents, the plans she had written herself. Her reaction wasn't explosive like I expected. It was quieter, heavier. She sat down, the weight of everything finally catching up to her. She tried to explain, tried to say it wasn't meant to happen this way, but there was no version of this that made sense anymore, not after what I had seen. When she asked what I wanted, I told her the truth. Nothing. I didn't want anything from her anymore. Not explanations, not apologies, not even closure. I was already past that point. I left that night and didn't come back. Everything that followed happened quickly. The company launched an investigation, and the consequences were immediate. Frank lost his position, Lauren's authority was stripped, and eventually she was forced out completely. The career she had spent decades building collapsed under the weight of her own decisions. Our divorce was finalized within months, and with the evidence I had, there was no real fight left in it. The house was sold, the life we had built together dismantled piece by piece, leaving nothing behind but memories I no longer wanted to carry. I moved into a smaller place by the lake. It was quiet, simple, and for the first time in a long time, it felt honest. No hidden rooms, no second lives, no secrets waiting to be discovered. Just space, time, truth. I heard later that Lauren and Frank didn't last. Without the secrecy, whatever they had built fell apart quickly. But by then, it didn't matter anymore. Their story was no longer mine. It took time to rebuild myself, to trust again, to understand what life looked like without the version of the future I had believed in for so long.
But slowly, things began to feel steady again. Not perfect, not the same, but real. And one day, sitting by the window in that quiet apartment, looking out at the water, I realized something I hadn't expected. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't broken. I was free. And for the first time in years, that was enough.